Great. Well, it's so good to see so many familiar faces on here and some new faces as well. We really thank you all for taking some time out of your busy schedules for joining us on the session today. We're going to keep it a relatively laid back session as well. It's really about answering your questions around the pack, especially in the New Zealand context for today. So if you haven't used Zoom, if you're not super familiar with it, we do recommend using headphones. Once some of the presenters get started, we do also ask that you just keep yourself on mute to make sure that there's no interference on the line. Feel free to use the chat box and just put your name in and where you're joining us from too, just so everybody knows who's in our virtual room. If you're comfortable with that, it'd be great. And then at the end of the session, we're going to have some question and answers as well. So feel free to pop your questions in as we go throughout today's session. And when we get to the end too, you can unmute yourselves again. We can open up to a bit of a discussion. All right. So like I mentioned, if you're not that familiar with Zoom, I think Helen's found the chat box down there, but it's just chat is down in the middle. Feel free to pop your name in there, where you're joining us from, and feel free to use that for any questions as we go throughout today's session as well. Great. So what will we be covering today? So like I mentioned, today's session is really around FAQs, so frequent questions and answers that we've been having around the Pact, especially in the New Zealand context. My name is Meredith Epp. If I haven't met you before, I'm the Sustainable Programs Officer here at APCO and supporting the team on the ANZPAC work. So I'll talk a little bit around what is ANZPAC, how will it actually work. Then we're really lucky here to also have a brand donor who's based in New Zealand, Bridget McBride, and Bridget is with Ecostore, fantastic organization that is working with ANZPAC. So we're going to hear from Bridget on why they're participating in the pack and some of her experiences as well, because she has some great personal experiences around the packs in other countries. And then next, we are also very lucky to have a guest speaker, Pedro San Simalo. I hope I've done that okay for you, Pedro. And Pedro is joining us from late at night over in Portugal, talking about the Portuguese Plastics Pact and sharing some really interesting key learnings on what they've done within the first bit of opening their pact and how some of those learnings can be applied to us in the New Zealand and the ANZPAC context. And then, like I mentioned, we'll try and leave a good chunk of time for question and answer. So feel free to pop those questions in as we go throughout. All right. So without further ado, before we get started as well, I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land in which we gather and pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. We're joining you here, the team from Sydney, and pay their respects to the elders and their connections to the land, water, and country. And also pay respects to the traditional owners wherever you may be joining us from around the region. So talking about ANZPAC, I think a lot of us here know a bit about ANZPAC so far, but I think what's really important is just keeping it on that high level. So ANZPAC is part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Global Plastics Pact. It joins 10 other packs and over 1,000 other organizations united behind Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Plastics Pact network, as well as that vision that Ellen MacArthur Foundation works on, which is to keep plastic waste out of landfill and in the economy. So really making sure that we're able to tap into this Plastics Pact network, I think, is a huge benefit of working with the packs. And we're really conscious that there's been some fantastic work already happening within the region. So in the New Zealand context, that New Zealand has signed up to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Global Declaration. And there is a lot of great work that's already happening here around plastics and plastics packaging. But when we speak with Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and Pedro can talk to this a little bit as well, is when the packs are really about delivering the action. So you have your declarations that are up on a higher global level, but the packs are all about that local action and really making tangible projects and initiatives work and working with local leaders to make sure that it's something that fits the best within the local context. So it's fantastic to see that there's such great commitments happening within New Zealand, within Australia, within the Pacific. But it's really about taking that local work and plugging it in within the region, and then we can plug that into the global context and have access to a number of other organizations that are doing similar work around the world and making sure that we're all working towards those similar targets and their overarching vision. So when I talk about targets and we talk about an overarching vision, what we've learned is that it's so important to have really clear set targets so that we all know what we're working towards, how we want to get there. So the targets have been developed within consultation throughout the region over the past year and a half since the pact was first announced back in March of last year. So the 4 targets that we're focusing on are the first one, eliminating unnecessary and problematic plastic packaging through redesign, innovation, or alternative delivery or reuse models. The second is 100% of plastic packaging to be reusable, recyclable, or compostable by 2025. And then an increase in current volume of plastic packaging collected and effectively recycled by at least 25 for each geography within the ANZPAC region. And we've had a few questions around this target as well. So it's taking that baseline wherever a country may be. So in Australia, for example, if that's at 14 or 16%, then increasing that by another 25%. So it'd be the same for each of the different regions, like New Zealand or in the Pacific Islands. But that first year that we work together is really about establishing what those baselines are so we can determine where the 25% threshold will be after that. And then the fourth target is an average of 25% recycled content in plastic packaging across the region as well. So really, I know a lot of us are very familiar with the circular economy principles already, but creating that market demand to help create value for plastic packaging and making sure it gets incorporated back into other materials. So those are the targets. That's what we'll be working towards. On to the next slide, we'll just talk a little bit about who's already joining the Pact. So we've had some fantastic uptake. We're still in a number of discussions, and that's why we're hosting these FAQ sessions. It's to really answer any questions. If anyone's on the fence or working to build a business case within your teams internally, today's the day where we're happy to answer those questions, or if it's something that you'd like to discuss offline with the APCO team, we're always happy to do that as well. So you can see here, we've had some great uptake already in the Pacific Islands, the Solomons, Vanuatu, and Samoa. Also within the New Zealand context, working closely with different supporter memberships, as well as industry. And then in Australia as well, working across industry and supporters. So really gaining some fantastic momentum that we're having around the packs. And I think it's really important, and we wanted to have these sessions to be very kind of country specific so that we make sure and answer any of those questions that are relevant to your own countries. We want there to be very equal representation within the pact from each of the regions, but also throughout the supply chain, because we know that there's so much work that needs to be done. And why the pacts are so fantastic is that it brings together all of these members in the supply chain, be it government, industry, or supporters, so that we can accelerate this change and make sure that we achieve the targets. So a common question, which of course you would be asking if you're trying to get the sign off to join the pact, is how will my organization benefit? So we have a few priority action areas for the region. First one is around really creating that market demand. So creating market demand for the plastics within Oceania and within the Plastics Pact region. And also working to eliminate problematic and unnecessary items, and implementing scalable alternatives or reuse and delivery models. Then the next priority area is around collection and recycling. So making sure that there is access to collect different material types. And that really connects back up to creating market demand as well. If we have a demand, it helps to make those collection methodologies that much more easy to scale up. And then the last area that we'll focus on too is around designing for reuse and recycling. So like I mentioned, there's already some great work that's been happening within the region. You can think in the Australian context, we have a number of design guidelines, sustainable packaging guidelines that can be used and shared within all the different members of the Pact, and focus on that from there. So another question we've been having is around what does membership look like? And like anything, it's all about really what you're hoping to achieve. So we're all about listening and understanding what's incredibly important to the businesses and to the organizations that have joined as part of the Pact. But there are a few fundamentals that are kind of part of every Pact that will continue to roll out. So the first is co-designing a regional roadmap. So making sure that everyone that's participating in ANZPAC are able to input into the roadmap and help us to understand what are some of those mutually reinforcing activities that we all need to do to make it to the targets. And then from there, we're able to establish some different working groups. So be that around a specific project or maybe even a specific region or specific material type. We'll determine with consensus from the group on what are some of those key working groups and areas that we want to focus on and make sure the right people are in the room. The next is working on some really practical solutions and projects and initiatives. So we've already had a few that have started in Australia back in January around product stewardship that can then be scaled up and that information shared within the rest of the group. But there's also some other practical initiatives that are coming through, and we're really committed to co-designing these with each of the different countries and understanding what are those priorities for each different member and region. Another area that's of great benefit too is global actions and network to expert knowledge. So we talk about it being a global pact. It's not just, kind of connecting with those in your local region, but it's also connecting back into the Ellen MacArthur Foundation wider network. So whether that be in certain areas of the supply chain, around a certain issue that you might be dealing with, and there'll be times and opportunities to feed into some of the big reports that Ellen MacArthur's doing, to also receive some of that information and to really connect with the wider network of EMF. And then finally, uniting behind the targets. So we know if we all know what we're working towards and what are the measures that support that, then there's a higher chance of actually succeeding and achieving those targets. Another area we really wanted to highlight with everyone today was around the collective action group. So the collective action group, or the CAG as it's being called, is really that steering committee. And it's incredibly important, like I mentioned, to have equal representation. So from Australia, from New Zealand, from the Pacific Islands, and making sure that there's equal representation between business, industry, government, and civil society across the plastic supply chain. So we really call on everyone here, especially in the New Zealand context, that we're looking for people to come and participate within this collective action group who want to have a part of this voice and to have a seat at the table around steering where the roadmap will be going and how will we reach and achieve the targets. It's really an opportunity to help to guide where we'll be going with the Pact, and an incredibly important role in terms of delivering the Pact as well. So if you have any further questions about joining the collective action group, definitely get in touch with the team afterwards. Another question that's been coming up too is around how will ANZPAC determine the initiatives that we work on? And the team's put a few parameters around how we'll decide which initiatives to work on. So one, is it scalable? One, is it replicable? 3, is it a practical initiative? And then 4th, is it actually achievable? We really want to be able to identify projects that then we could do, potentially piloting that in one country and then taking it out to the wider region and then plugging it back into the greater Pact network so that others can learn from it and potentially achieve similar results. The projects also need to deliver on the targets, have a high impact, support larger change, and generate long-term collaboration and progress. So I've mentioned we have a few projects that are already in the works, but the ANZPAC team is very committed to working with everyone to co-design other projects within the ANZPAC context. But also, if you're working on something within your own business or your own organization that you would just like a bit of support from the ANZPAC team on, that's absolutely something we're open to as well. So it doesn't necessarily need to sit under that umbrella, but ANZPAC is here to support work that might be happening a bit on the periphery as well. So that was a little bit about ANZPAC and some of the brief questions that we've had so far. But I think Bridget will probably say it much better than I ever would to be able to speak around her experiences that she's had back in the UK, and then speaking to her experience within Ecostore around why they've decided to join the Pact. So Bridget, I think you're here with us.
Yes.
You're all good?
Yeah, all good. So hi everyone, delighted to be here and to speak on behalf of Ecostore today. So I'll just talk through a couple of question points and then as well about my experience in the UK. So a little bit about Ecostore. If you haven't heard of us, we're a sustainable home, personal care, baby and oral care business. Born in New Zealand, but now in Australia, China, Japan, Taiwan, Korea. So I guess we're growing. The reason we joined ANZPAC is probably twofold. I guess sustainability is at our core with our business. It's everything that we do as a business, and we're all about eliminating plastic where we can. We've made a few big steps in that direction. So probably like many of you on the call, we've signed up to the New Plastics Economy Global Commitment from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We've signed up to a Line in the Sand and the New Zealand's Plastic Packaging Declaration. Within that, we have made some public commitments. So 100% of our plastic packaging will be recyclable or reusable by 2023. 100% of our bottles will be from renewable or recycled content. To things like we'll be continuing to invest in renewable plastics. This year we launched a plastic return program where for the first time we've been collecting all of our bottles and then remaking them into new bottles. So lots of initiatives happening, public goals, and we feel pretty confident and on track that we'll get there. But there's still a really massive problem. And I think if you see some of the stats, I think within New Zealand, about 941 bottles consumed from every household each year, and only 40% of those are recycled. So whilst we're on track and we're kind of working at our own pace and with our partners or suppliers today, we recognise that there's a much bigger job to be done, and I don't think we can do it alone. And what we see is the value in the Pact by doing something as a collective and sort of working with tangible goals on the ground with Australia and New Zealand. So I guess getting some uniformity across markets as well, so not just New Zealand only. But we feel that there's a really big opportunity there to extend our networks to work towards these goals. I guess in terms of the key challenges that we face with plastics and the benefits that we think the ANZPAC agreement will bring to us, we're all about designing out plastic. So we've got innovations like we've launched sort of hair care bars or a solid form of shampoos. We've got other projects in the pipeline, but they're not really going to move the needle, I guess, on that big number. So the more that we can do to work with an extended network around designing out waste, the more radical ideas that we can have. So at the moment, everything's sold in plastic bottles on the shelf today. Imagine if the government came in or retailers came in and said, let's not sell single-use plastic bottles every day, or let's put a tax on those. There could be a lot more that we could do if we really, I guess, get together and have bigger goals together. There's also lots of problem plastics in our categories. So things like pumps, triggers, caps, a lot of that stuff today, we don't really have a solution for it. And across New Zealand, I think they've just sort of said that there will be some uniformity in guidelines where now all of those kind of items go into landfill instead of into recycling. So that is an issue for us that we would love to address with partners who face the same challenges that we do. Potentially we could invent something that you don't throw away that does last forever, but there are lots of ideas out there that we need help to get to. And then as well, just sort of behaviour change of the masses. So I think Australia's made some really good progress with a lot of the guidelines set by APCO around sort of the standardisation of recycling. Potentially that's something that we could have across the board in New Zealand, but getting some consistency there. So as a small brand, trying to put guidelines on all of our packaging, if across the regions we did the same thing, that would just make things much easier for us and for our consumers. Yeah, so I guess they would be some of the key benefits that we see in joining the Pact. There was other questions around it's a regional pact and what do we find appealing about the regional approach. When I was in the UK, I guess I was part of Unilever, working in a local brand team. And there was a European Pact that set by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And then there was the UK Plastics Pact. And what that did for us was we set then goals as a local business against that UK Plastics Pact. But it wasn't just us that did that. So the likes of Tesco's and Sainsbury's, big retailers, also did the same thing. And what that really helped us do was start to trial some really interesting initiatives with those customers. So sort of launching automatic refill stations in an Asda store, because I guess we're all singing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to what our goals are. And it was a really big enabler for us as a country and a business within that country to get to that sort of change much quicker. I guess in terms of the benefit that it will bring to our organisation in New Zealand, I've probably touched on the points around sort of making things a bit more uniform across markets. And we've already got some really great resources in New Zealand, like the Sustainable Business Network that keep us connected, the Sustainable Business Council. And I think this is just sort of the next pillar to that, which is connecting us to Australia and the Pacific to take us that little bit further as well. And then I guess what would I say to other New Zealand organisations about joining the Pact? I guess if you've already signed up to the Ellen MacArthur commitments, if you're already a member of these other great organisations in New Zealand, this is just that one extra step. It doesn't seem too expensive to get on board. It seems like they've got a really equipped and resourced team to help us out. So I guess like us, we'd love to work with you, and I think the more great businesses that we get on board, the more good that we can do together.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bridget.
Yeah,
I think you've put that really well. And I loved hearing about your experience with the UK Plastics Pact and the Global Pact. I think that's, you know, exactly what we would hope the intention would be here with ANZPAC is, you know, to really create some of that action here on the ground and to share some of the knowledge and create some of those awesome collaborations and partnerships like you've seen over there. So if anybody has any more questions for Bridget, please feel free to pop those in the chat now, and then we'll have some time for Bridget to talk through those. But definitely take advantage of her knowledge and expertise in this space. So thank you so much, Bridget. We do have another guest speaker who is joining us from late at night over in Portugal. So Pedro is a coordinator for the Pacto in Portuguese. I won't try and say it in Portuguese because I'll just absolutely butcher that. But Pedro, are you with us? Are you happy to take over and start talking a little bit about how the Pact has worked in Portugal?
Yes. Thank you very much. First for this invitation and for the opportunity to present the Portuguese Plastics Pact. As Meredith was saying, I'm the coordinator of the initiative. And as you will see, this presentation is pretty much the same as you see in the first presentation, but applied to I would say, 1 year implementation of the initiative. And presenting the initial results that I think it's also important for you to understand what can be achieved in these first months of implementation. So I start exactly with the same slide of the network, still not a circle or in the ANZPAC region, but hopefully in the near future, be part of this incredible network. And as you see, we share a common vision. We share also a common problem, the plastic pollution, and we want to overcome this problem through a transition to a circular economy. So this is the global vision of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and each lead organization has the opportunity to take action to implement the vision at the national context. So the next slide is just the statement of our vision applied for Portugal. Is exactly the same that you will have in the ANZPAC region. And as you will see in the next slide, is the targets that are common across the different plastics pacts. So at least the 4 upper targets are exactly the same across the different regions and countries. The only thing that changes slightly is the percentages adapted to the local context. And I would like to add that Portugal has an additional target focus on consumer awareness and education, a specific one, as the members of the Pact, when we were designing the initiative, consider consumer as a key part of this transition. So we decided to state that as one of our main targets to be achieved by 2025. Next slide. Okay, so this is just the presentation of the effective members, or business members as you call. They comprise the whole plastics value chain here in Portugal, from raw material producers until the recycler, plastic converters included, FMCG companies, retailers, EPR management companies. So all the value chain together. Some brands you will recognize, but I can tell you that the ones you don't are very important companies here in Portugal. So a high representativeness that is important for what I will explain later. And supporting these members are the supporting members, or supporter members, as you mentioned, that include university, research centers, municipalities. Also, we were the first part to include municipalities, public agencies and governmental agencies, NGOs and business associations. So all in all, it's a big representativeness of the whole value chain, and it's something unprecedented here in Portugal. We have a lot of sectorial projects or initiatives, but not as big, comprising the whole value chain. And also comprising a very important endorsement from the Portuguese presidency. Next slide. And also, not just an endorsement, but a real supporter of the Portuguese Plastics Pact is the Portuguese government through the Ministry of Environment, Economy, and the Seas, that are the three that are more related with this topic. So on the next slide, you can see not what I'm saying, but what our members report to us as the main value for being part of the initiative. And 1 year passed, and this is the average answer of our members. So the first thing is cross-sector dialogue. As I mentioned, it's an unprecedented initiative, and suddenly brand owners start to speak with recyclers. That never happened before in this sort of approach. Industry also involved in the discussions, and all in a safe space for discussion. So it's a pre-competitive discussion, which is important. And it's also important where companies can discuss openly when NGOs, for instance, the topic of plastic pollution without all this media coverage. So it's a safe place where all doubts, all innovation can be discussed in detail and openly. Then positive communication for the members. All of you are doing, I imagine, very good work, as we have seen in the previous example, in terms of making this transition to a circular economy. Sometimes it's difficult to, by oneself, to show up this good work. As a collective initiative, it's easier, this communication to pass through to the final consumer. Also potential for innovation partnerships. So this cross-sector dialogue also implies that. Just an example, we had an industry developing a compostable bag. They follow all the standards needed for it to be compostable in the European context. But the infrastructure in Portugal was not the one they were expecting. So they partnered with a recycler in order to test in real conditions if the bag was compostable, and in the end it was not, so they need to change everything. But anyway, it's a good way to start a partnership for innovation. Also lobby capacity. So with a high representativeness, the pact has the power to support the government to promote good regulation and legislation for the transition to a circular economy. And as Meredith was saying in the beginning, knowledge and learning sharing, not only nationally, but also internationally. We, as we will see, we did a few webinars with members from the other pacts that share their innovation, their expertise, which is also very important for the national context. So our next slide is the barriers that we felt in this first year. The first one, I imagine, is a global barrier, negative public view on plastics. It was something that we were aware in the beginning. We started a national campaign it didn't change that much. So something that you need to progressively work on. Align different stakeholders' agendas. We all have a common vision, but we all have our own idea how to achieve this vision. And it's very important to be open to listen and to discuss different perspectives. Effective outputs from your working groups. So start a working group with a fixed deliverable in mind. Otherwise, you just get in a spiral of discussion that could be interesting, but does not produce as much. And lack of initial data. So we will start reporting next month, the first reporting. And sometimes it's difficult to take decisions without the real picture of the members and of the collective. So year we had more than paying on their supermarkets, all their supermarkets, and it was so successful that the other retailers follow suit. So almost all retailers now have our campaign in their supermarkets. We had more than 15 expert webinar sessions. We started with 55 founding members, and right now we are more than 100. We designed the roadmap and agreed on the roadmap for 2025. And we also agreed, and this is the most difficult achievement that we did so far on the list of single-use plastics considered to be unnecessary or problematic and to be eliminated by 2025. And you may be aware in the European Union, there is now a regulation that will enforce some single-use plastics to be phased out. This list includes these single-use plastics, but many more, which represents the commitment and leadership that the organizations that are part of the Portuguese Plastics Pact have. On next slide, what we intend to do during this year. So as I said, the initial reporting, continue our efforts in external communications through a new campaign, education and new innovation programs, engage more with the government, especially with the ministries. One working group is working on a collaborative pilot for reuse business models. So it's something that we will do collectively and enhance and foster partnerships, especially here in Europe, where there are many complementary initiatives similar to ours. So in order not to duplicate efforts, we want to align as much as we can to reinforce our action. And finally, just a picture of what was the launch event of the Portuguese Plastics Pact. And just to highlight, it was 55 organizations founding the initiative. We filled the whole stage, but more, and right now we are more than 100. And what I would like to highlight is the number of people involved. So a lot of brains, a lot of brain power working in solutions, innovations to make this transition to a circular economy. And this is, I would say, the beauty of the Plastics Pact and the impact that it can have to tackle the problem of plastic pollution. Yeah, and I'll be open for any questions now on the Q&A, and thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you so much, Pedro. Fantastic. Very inspiring to see all those people together. Obviously, in a pre-COVID world, we would have loved to get everyone together within the region. And I think you touched on a really good point there too. It's a lot about listening. And I think that's one of the beauties of the pact too, and something that we're really committing to doing within the Pacific, within New Zealand, within the Australian context, is listening to what are those priorities for everyone? What are some of those key constraints? And then how can we work through and really accelerate the change here? So we've already got some great questions coming through on the chat. Looks like everyone's kind of figured out how to do that, but now feel free to pop things into the chat box, or alternatively, if you'd like to ask your question out loud, you're welcome to do that as well, and we can have a little bit of discussion. So I'd like to introduce a couple other of the ANZPAC team members in a minute here. So we have with us also Leslie Fox. So Leslie is the Partnership and Development Officer here at APCO, and she's been doing fantastic work over the past year and a half around getting ANZPAC up and running. So Leslie will help to answer a few questions. And we also have Matilda Gable. Matilda is the ANZPAC coordinator and has been doing some great work with the team as well to help answer some of those questions, as well as Helen Milliser, who's the ANZPAC program manager, who's here also. So Matilda, I'll hand over to you and feel free to start us off with some questions.
Hi everyone. Well, it's been great to have everyone popping their questions into the chat box. I think we'll just go straight in, and there's a question here from Rob, which is really interesting. Leslie, this might be one for you. It says, with New Zealand government declaring single-use plastics as a priority product, therefore requiring industry directly to address the material life, how is it envisioned that ANZPAC is a voice or complements the decisions within the co-design process?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Just want to make sure. Okay, great. So yeah, our intention is definitely be to work very closely alongside government, industry, and other key stakeholders in order to make sure that the whole packaging supply chain, key stakeholders, and obviously policy developments, strategy developments, program developments from government, take into consideration everybody's situation, everybody's understanding, to make sure that obviously we want to all strive for success here, and we don't feel, and in order to do that, all key players need to be involved. We have a lot of experience in this area, in the sense that we provide a lot of information to government on representing industry, on what can be what is practical and can be implemented in terms of phasing out activities, design activities, ideas for regulation, things like that. So we have a lot of experience in that area, but obviously in relation to packaging. And what we've actually seen in regards to other plastic packs around the world is that governments are actually liaising with different plastic packs to get an understanding of what can be realistically done in these areas. For example, I'm aware that the UK government liaised with the UK Plastic Pact in regards to the recycled content target, because obviously they had a number of organisations already committed to working towards these targets. So it seemed a logical sense for the government to see, well, you guys are already committed to doing this. We might as well, this is where the direction we should go, instead of imposing on completely unrealistic or targets or strategies that have not been engaged with industry. So that's the hope, and that's the aim that we want to really implement there, because we feel for us to gain, meet the targets and to implement a considerable impression, we need to be involved in that design process. And I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Mer, and thanks, Leslie. If anyone has any points or would like to say anything, just let us know. I suppose this ties in a little bit as well to Keith's question, and Meredith, this might be one for you, but just defining that difference between a supporting member and what we call a business member under the ANZPAC membership.
Yeah, absolutely. So a great question. There are sort of the two categories, if you will, and Pedro mentioned this as well, and it's similar to all packs, where a business member, or what we're calling ANZPAC members, officially would be a business that's within the packaging or the plastic supply chain. And those would be paid memberships, and that's based on the size of the business. Then alternatively, there's a supporter membership, and that's for academia, that's for industry associations, and governments, community groups, not-for-profits, anyone kind of working in that space. So those are kind of the two differences between the groups. And Keith, to one of your other points too, around that slide that we put up, there's a lot of conversations happening across the board with different governments and with a number of different stakeholders as well. And just making sure that we have a comprehensive representation across the region. So definitely still getting those membership forms in on a daily basis, and having a number of different conversations there. So I anticipate that we'll have great support across the board there. It's just making sure those final I's are dotted and T's are crossed, if you will.
Thanks, Meredith. Meredith, there's another question here, which was in conversation when Bridget was speaking about her problematic plastics, so talking about triggers and pumps, etc. And just wondering, how does this work when starting a project or collaborating with businesses with similar problems within the Pact?
Absolutely. So I can speak to this a little bit, but Pedro, it would be great to hear kind of how you guys have tackled this. But within kind of the ANZPAC context, similar to what Bridget mentioned, it's getting people that are in those similar situations, identifying the problem. So always kind of the approach that we've taken within APCO is identifying some of those, the baseline on what's the volumes, what are some of those key areas that we're really coming into troubles with around there? And then what are some opportunities around the different innovations, or what else could we do in expanding our thinking a little bit with that wide group of different stakeholders? And then from there, understanding what's going to be a viable solution. But I think the real value of having all the different stakeholders in the group is so that we can test and trial and accelerate those things a bit faster, rather than just one organization going out and kind of trialing it yourself and then maybe hitting some roadblocks and things from there. Pedro, did you have anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I would say I would add for the last part, I would say that is the most important, at least in our case. Avoid roadblocks or avoid potential errors. We had a few members that moved fast, trying to move before regulation be applied, and start to implement some sorts of solutions that created more problems than the one they were trying to solve. And through the different working groups, the different discussions, they understood what they were doing wrong, and there was time still to avoid these errors. As I mentioned, for the case of the compostable bag, that in theory it was compostable, but in practice they found out that was not. And this is the great thing about multi-stakeholder and across a whole value chain collaboration, is that you can avoid these errors. And of course, the more interesting part is that you can partner together with other members of the Portuguese plastic, in the case of the Portuguese Plastics Pact or the Plastics Pact as in general, to promote innovation projects. We had a few members now working on that. In our case, we are a very small structure. We just launch the collaboration, and then the members follow all the effort and report to us what they are doing. But this is, I would say, the many initial steps were taken in the discussions in the working groups for innovation projects. So this is, I think, one of the key benefits of being part of an initiative like this.
Mm. Great. Thank you, Pedro and Meredith. In that vein, we've had a few questions coming in around sort of the working groups. So how we envision these may look like, how many people they could include, and then also twofold to that, how then will the objectives identified in these working groups be implemented? Pedro, you may have some practical examples of this, and keeping in mind that we are in that development phase. So if you have any examples, and then we can hand it to Meredith as well.
Sure. The first thing is focus on the targets. This is the baseline to create any working group. This was what we did in the first year. We create a group for each of the main 4 targets of the Portuguese Plastics Pact, and then 2 other groups. One focus on metrics and definitions. That is something that is relevant. When we started, we didn't have the guidelines from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, so the group was very relevant. And also a working group on the roadmap. Although all the groups give input to the roadmap, we created a specific one with that target in mind. And as I mentioned, you always have to have this deliverable at the end. For instance, the case for single-use plastics list was the major goal for 2020, and through the working group, it was achieved. But then when we published the roadmap, new needs emerged, So while in this first year, I usually say it was year 0 because everybody was meeting everybody for the first time. And in this year 0, you start to recognize the difficulties within your national, regional context. So in this new year, in 2021, we have 2 new working groups because of that. So people start to, within the working groups, identify other needs and the need to create new ones.
Yeah, great. Meredith or anyone, did you have anything to add there?
I think what Pedro said is probably the approach that we'll take as well, looking around those targets. And then similar to, I guess, the framework that we've run things within APCO that's been quite successful is if you have a working group that's focused on the certain targets, and then there may be some initiatives that kind of fall under that target or like in that bucket as well, and then those can feed in. So as you know, as an individual trying to think about how much time would be going into this, if you're working on a specific initiative or project, there might be a bit more time during the duration of that project, and then that gets fed up into the working groups so that we can be sure to share that knowledge, and then that gets fed into the wider ANZPAC groups and regions from there. So using some of those criteria that we talked about before on how do we select which initiatives or projects we'll go ahead with, but it is really about for us, and what Pedro mentioned too, is listening to the groups, listening to our members and our supporters, and identifying what are some of those areas that we really need to accelerate first and foremost, and then bringing that within the working groups as well.
Definitely. Thank you. Leslie, this may be something for you and Meredith as well, but Karen is just wondering for a bit more of an understanding as to why the regional pact has been developed, so why we're including Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific Islands, especially as there's a mix of developed, emerging and countries in different stages of the plastic closed loop journey.
I'll start if that's all right. So the decision was made when we started looking into developing or looking into a plastic pact. It was because we identified that there was a need for us to take a lot of action in regards to plastic in Australia, and we really wanted to focus in on that area. So when we looked internationally for programs that we could maybe model here in Australia, we came across the Plastics Pact and started our engagement with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation on this. They were actually already in discussions, obviously, with New Zealand and the Pacific Islands at the time about this need also to focus on plastics. So we felt that there was this big need that on a regional level to focus on, that there was an opportunity actually to focus on it on a regional level. Cross collaborations, we're obviously doing a lot of work with each other anyway, trade, different things like that, that we felt that we could actually, there was an opportunity here for us to actually collaborate and do that as well. And I have to say, since the Plastic Pact, since we've started taking on membership, I've seen this really enhance in the sense that a lot of our members actually are, they export to New Zealand or Pacific Islands, and there's a lot of interest, not just working on a national level, but on a regional level. So a lot of our members are actually joining because of the fact that it is a regional program, and that they can actually, implement a lot of change and be involved in initiatives and working groups that will actually benefit the region and their footprint within the region. And actually some of the projects that are actually being investigated at the moment are actually cross-regional projects, because that's actually what a lot of the stakeholders are actually looking for, and members. So I've seen that now. I think it was a really wise decision to go into a regional, because we're actually seeing a lot of collaboration along the whole packaging supply chain, because we're all involved in this big packaging value chain and supply chain anyway. So it actually is coming to light now with these new members coming on board and the type of projects that we'll be delivering and are being needed. Meredith, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you've summarised it really well, Leslie, and I think for so much of us, when we did a bit of research too, just on the background within the Oceania region, for so many of us, our big industries are around natural resources, so fishing, kind of primary industries. It's also used to be at least around tourism and all of our reputations as clean, green nations for people to come and visit. And plastics actually present that big risk when they're ending up in the environment, to the tourism and to the economy there. And that we are, when you think about the Oceania region as a whole, at the end of the day, we're all relatively smallish countries when you compare to Europe or North America. So the more that we can come together and really have a voice in this, and be proactive and showing some of the fantastic work that's happening on our own terms within a local level, that helps to really showcase the work that we're doing on that global stage. And I think that really benefits us all as a region. The more that we can collaborate, stop to duplicate any reinventions of the wheel. There's so much great work that's happening in each of these different countries already. And let's share that, and I think that it doesn't need to be a competition or anything like that. It's about working together, because every single one of us will be impacted by this wicked problem, and for future generations. So that's what's gotten me really motivated about the Pact and excited to be working and learning from other countries.
Thank you. And just a note to say that popping these questions in, if we don't get them to them today, we'll get back to you separately following the session. We've had quite a few questions coming in around small and small to medium sized businesses and the actual fee structure for ANZPAC. As these are sort of the way that the plastic pacts work, I might just throw this over to Bridget a little bit and just ask about, as a sort of small to medium business in New Zealand, the sort of value that you see out of that membership, and what made you decide that membership fee was, of value for you and your business.
Yeah, sure. I guess with such a big problem, it will require multiple solutions, being members of, I guess, multiple different things, and then working together with as many people as we can to really solve that problem. And I guess for us as Ecostore, we are members of quite a few different groups as well. I guess being a small company, similar to ANZPAC and to other groups, the membership structures, I guess, are really put in place. So depending on your size, it also depends how much you pay. So I think for us, it was a really accessible entry point to be a part of this. And we also see this hopefully as kind of the biggest group of all that we're part of that can help sort of influence government and change across the regions that we have a business in. So for us, I think there could be, there's a lot of potential here. And I guess you kind of have to take that leap of faith. Obviously, it's all being figured out. We're working on it as we speak. But by having a foot in the door and being able to help influence that, hopefully we can still tackle some of the big problems that we face, but also for New Zealand and Australia as well.
Yeah, thank you, Bridget. Meredith or Leslie, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think, Bridget, you summed it up really well there, and that's exactly what we're hoping to, is that, the Plastics Pact is, the Plastics Pact network is one of the biggest networks happening in this space, united behind that common vision for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And I think that's exactly what we're hoping for and aiming to achieve here within the Pact, is trying to make that be really accessible. There's some questions coming in about the Pacific Islands as well, and making sure that we can be inclusive with them. And that's where, again, those supporter memberships can also come in for really small businesses, where we encourage them to work with maybe an industry association that they are a part of, and get a number of small businesses together, get that industry association to come on as a supporting member, and they can get some of the learnings through that membership as well.
Definitely. I'm conscious of time, but I thought I would just ask one final question that's come through, perhaps for Leslie, and it's just the talking or mentioning of projects and as we develop these solutions and required funds. So is this something that ANZPAC will look at? Is it part of the membership fee, or is it an additional cost? Leslie?
Yes, so the plan is to deliver a number of projects and initiatives. Ideally, we just would like to fund them through the program. Obviously, if we get additional external funding, or if we need to go above and beyond, we may need to seek external funding. But at the plan, this is what the membership is all about. We want to it's a very long-term, this is going to be a long-term program. Obviously, we're reaching towards the 2025 targets, but this is something that we want to continue going into the future with our memberships, delivering projects that will obviously benefit and, you know, and reduce the impact of plastic packaging on the environment. So basically the membership will help to obviously fund the projects and initiatives that we will be delivering. But like I said, if obviously external funding, we always look for opportunities for grant funding, for financial funding from other things that can as well, or you know, how effectively we can deliver projects, maybe some partnership opportunities and stuff like that. So there won't be kind of like we won't be kind of, oh great, you're a member now give us extra for this or that. That really is, we're trying to within our membership look towards delivering of projects and initiatives that way.
Great, thank you. Well, I am conscious that we are going to run a little bit over. So what I'll do is I'll hand back to Meredith. If you need to drop off, feel free to just drop off and we'll go back to any of those questions that we missed. So Meredith, handing back over to you.
Great, thank you, Matilda, and thank you for the fabulous discussion and questions from everyone. It's great to be seeing those come through, and that's exactly what we were hoping for this session. And like Matilda mentioned, if we didn't get to it, we'll flash the ANZPAC email up on the screen in a second here. But I think what we've covered through the discussion really highlights why ANZPAC does bring us together. It's about that regional intervention coordination. Let's try to not duplicate any of the work, streamline so that we can really accelerate. And that, you know, it's already happening. We're working in a global economy. At the moment, we're working within our regional context, but we all know that we're working in a wider global area, and it's really important to address the plastics issue on the global scale. And that's what's really appealing to the Pact. And that idea of true collaboration too is so important. So just around next steps. So if you're on the fence, feel free to get in touch if you have any further questions whatsoever, but do join us. Really encourage you to send those membership forms in. If you have any further questions, definitely let us know. Also encourage you to apply for the collective action group. We'll be sending out some more information about that shortly. But if you are interested in being part of that steering committee, we really want some strong representation from New Zealand. And then also to, you know, put your hands up around some of those working groups. And, you know, we want to hear your voice as well around what you think is important and should be a focus there too. And finally, join us for a launch party. So we'll be launching officially on the 18th of May. If you want to be included as that a founding member and in some of those press releases and things that will go out around May 18th, be sure to get your forms into us before the 10th of May, just so that the team has that much time to make sure we have quotes from you and that we can include you in the launch. But also really important to note that even after this date, if you're still working through it internally, you can absolutely join the Pact after that. It's just kind of the first time that we'll kick things off. We'll have a bit of a party here in Sydney, and we'll be sending across some materials for New Zealand as well, so you can host something really fun, and same for the different organizations in the Pacific, so we can all celebrate together. The team is going to pop up a poll now as well. So if you have a quick minute, please feel free to fill that in. Bridget and Pedro, we really appreciate you guys spending some time with us and telling us about your experiences. Bridget, did you have any final words that you'd like to leave everyone with?
Just that I'm looking forward to getting started. So yeah, please sign up. We'd love to work with a diverse range of businesses out there. So yeah, let's get going.
Awesome. And Pedro, anything from you?
Just saying that after 1 year of implementation, the Portuguese Plastics Pact is much more than we expected. So the power of collaboration really works. So I really hope the same for the ANZPAC Plastics Pact. All of best of lucks.
Great. Thank you, Pedro. Thank you both to our guest speakers, and thank you for the ANZPAC team for all of the great work behind the scenes here as well. You've got the email address there, anzpac@apco.org.au. Please send us an email if you have any questions. We're always happy to chat, and we look forward to seeing you all on the 18th of May for a little bit of a launch party. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.